without further ado, let me introduce Josh. So, Josh is the co-founder of Rego, which is an AI-powered waste diversion platform. Really cool. So, Rego is reducing the disposal of large items such as furniture and textiles to create cleaner communities. And plus, it also helps people to make tracking and reporting sustainability data, so ESG is more simple. And a fun fact, Rego has already helped entities like apartment buildings, universities, construction companies, and other organizations redirect over 120,000 pounds of furniture to local nonprofit organizations instead of landfills, which is super awesome. And what's interesting to us about Rego and why we brought Josh into the e-course that some of you have seen and the interview that we already did is that we really like Josh's and Rego's approach for recycling because they're redirecting waste, which I think is amazing. And they're bringing it to a robust secondhand marketplace of community members, companies, nonprofit organizations, and more. So we really think that this is an amazing end-of-life strategy that you guys should take note of and maybe even gain inspiration from when you're creating your own projects. So yes, really take this opportunity to get acquainted with someone who's actually doing circular strategies in real life, has a business that went from idea to actually in the marketplace. Take advantage of this and ask as many questions as you can. So I will give the floor to you all. Maybe first, I don't know, Josh, did you want to say anything else before we jump in, or are you ready?
No, I'm very grateful to be here and excited to help where I can, and just share a lot of our mistakes over the past few years.
Amazing. Just also a quick tip. You can hover over Josh's window there and click pin if you want to make his face bigger. So it looks like a little presentation.
Who
All
doesn't?
right.
Come on, look at
Yes.
that. Oh my goodness.
Wow. There you are. All right. So you
Sorry,
can,
I did it for
everyone,
you.
Can you see how late I was out last night? No.
you look great, Josh. You look great. So if you
Oh,
want, you can start raising your hands, start dropping questions in the chat. In the meantime, I have questions that people already asked in, so we can start with one of those while people are getting into it. So we have a question from Kira, and Kira wanted to know if you could explain Rego's approach to partnering with construction teams and how it might apply to a startup that's focused on sustainable urban spaces.
that's a really good question. I can really only speak to it from the context of the U.S. maybe and like specific parts of the U.S. So I hope it will at least the approach will be transferable wherever you are. But what we learned by working with these construction companies is that when we bring them a solution, it actually has to work for the customer who's hiring them. So a lot of times we would say, hey, here's this really logical solution that would save you money. And then, we would essentially get a no, or we'd say, hey, here's this really good environmental thing and still get a no and not really figure out why. And then we realized, in their sort of like pre-planning, pre-construction and sort of bidding phase, right? Like when they're going to try and approach a customer, um, a lot of what they were working into that bid obviously had to make financial sense to their customers. So then we learned that when we were bringing something to them, it had to be very early in the process for them, right? Like in terms of going out to place a bid or try to get some money from a local government to like build something. And then it had to make economic sense in order to fit within their bid. Um, and then once we got in there and really understood like how to make it more appealing from a business perspective, then we could bring in the circular strategy. It's not perfect. It really doesn't work on every like job site. I would say most job sites it actually doesn't work, especially depending on the type of waste that they're going to be dealing with. So I would say really understand your product and your niche and be okay with a lot of the projects where it just isn't going to be a fit, which can be frustrating in the early days because you want to say, hey, I know this will work so well, but it's like, hey, there's actually a million reasons why they can't loop it in. And if you push too much, they're not going to want to come back to you for like other future projects. So if you can just find a way to like stick with it and stay front of mind for when like there is a good opportunity, they'll almost come back to you and say, hey, I'm actually dealing with a ton of office furniture that we need to get out. What do you think about this? Like, let me send you photos, right? And then we could get in and say, all right, well, what does the budget look like? What does the timing look like? What's the elevator situation, right? And then we could craft our strategy that fit within their budget. So again, it's frustrating, startups, you want to move really fast, but a lot of times in the circular economy or reuse space, you're not necessarily in where things aren't moving at the same speed as maybe like a Facebook or another type of software product. So yeah, it can certainly be frustrating, but that ended up being our approach after we learned more about the incentive structures within these construction companies.
Yes, I could not agree more. Definitely one thing you said really stuck out, which is to be okay with people coming back when they're ready. And it happens to us so often that you're having a conversation and it seems like it's not a good fit right now. You're kind of bummed, but then someone comes back later because all of a sudden there's a use case and they think of you. So it's so important to just get out there, share your idea, say, hey, this service is available, even before you think it's a good fit for that person because they could come back.
Yeah. And if you really start to learn a lot about the market, which we had to do, right? And again, we don't work with a ton of construction companies by any stretch, but they're awesome projects when we get the opportunity to do a collaboration there. Um, you want to make it as easy as possible for them to say yes. So it stinks, right? Like it's going to take time to say, well, let me actually write the portion of the contract for the customer of where Rego would fit in. Um, so you could say, hey, here's exactly what it would look like. Here's exactly how you could present it. And here's where we believe you would save money or have some outcome that would be advantageous, right? And then that person, you have to remember they're working, 8 to 10 hours a day too. Lower their cognitive load so they can say, oh, great, actually, yeah, this can work, and they can just insert it right into whatever they need. Um, again, it's not a perfect system, and you can't necessarily do it all the time, but if you know the product really well and the market really well and how they need to operate, you can take that legwork off of their plate.
Hmm. Yes. And Kira, I hope that answers your question. I see that you're here. I want to give space to the other questions I see coming up in the chat, but in the end, maybe Kira, if you want to ask again or something further, because I know this is exactly what you want to do. So Josh is a great person to connect with. But let's see some questions in the chat. Marco, did you see any questions?
Yeah, we have one from Craig. It asks, Josh, what sources of financing have you used to start and grow Rego? Did your financing progression follow what most of us will consider a high potential growth startup?
So my source of financing was this. It was my own wallet, and I say that somewhat jokingly, like Jennifer and Marco know this. I actually had a sports career for a long time where like I didn't make any money. I got a job, and in a year and a half, I saved up $17,000 and thought I was rich. I really did. I was like, wow, like I can live for like 2 years, And so I sort of naively used that, which was like literally my like savings at that point to start the company. So like I didn't necessarily aim to start like this software company per se, like to go out and raise money, but we were more so acting like an evolution of a junk removal and delivery service. So our initial thought was, hey, why isn't there just a better way to keep these things out of landfills once they're picked up? Because if we could do that, we could save people a lot of money, eliminate a lot of the short dumping or illegal dumping around the city. And it was a little bit easier because you were getting paid for every job that you did. So it wasn't like a lot of software companies where you have this huge deficit in developer costs. Like we would do a service and then get paid. So that made it a little bit easier for us to bootstrap for about 2 years. And then once we started learning more about how the technology we were building for ourselves could have a bigger market impact in a positive direction for the circular economy, keeping things out of landfills, whatever you want to call it, we felt like there was a bigger opportunity to bring our technology to market, not necessarily us driving trucks everywhere, but the technology we built for ourselves to make it easier to do that. And so what we did is essentially said, hey, we actually have a ton of data of how this would work if it was a software company, because we're literally doing it for ourselves. It would just instead work for other, types of junk companies, for example, or other nonprofit organizations or other customers. And so we leveraged that data plus what we had already built to then go and raise from an accelerator called Techstars. So that was like a really great experience for us for a number of reasons, but that gave us the financing that we needed to transition from a service-based business to a technology-based startup, and sort of weather that deficit where you really don't make any money while you're developing, right? And so that helped us bridge the gap and allow us to do some creative things with the customers that we had when we were doing the services ourselves, until we could make that full seamless transition for them into the tech startup and then go on to raise additional investor dollars. I'm making that story sound very easy and linear. I promise it was significantly harder than that and took years. But for the nature of time, I'll keep it short and linear. But I hope that answers the question. I know that was a little bit all over the place.
No, I am laughing because I feel you. It's quite similar with Aula. Financing is one of those things that, is not linear at all, comes from many different sources. You're kind of making your way as you go, but cannot highlight the help that an accelerator program or like these on-ramping programs can be for these early stage ideas. It's a great space where you can feel free kind of to fail a little bit. They give you a little runway to experiment, talk to your users. Stuff like VC comes much later. So I appreciate that it's non-linear and that you highlighted that 100%.
I would also stress too, like there's so much hype around raising investor dollars, and there has been for a long time. It's really not an accomplishment like it's made out to be in headlines. Like obviously companies want that publicity, but you have to understand that it's more of a promise and somewhat of a guarantee to investors for a return on something, rather than like saying, hey, I raised money, we are successful. Like I think people really underestimate the importance and the responsibility that comes with raising money from investors. Mm-hmm. So I really want to stress that and encourage people to actually spend a lot of time looking for other avenues of financing rather than investors, because the traditional route, everybody's going to say go pitch investors, but you're just going to be one of a million people pitching all of these investors.
Yes, 100%. And VC is not for every idea. If you're a SaaS tech company that wants to grow fast and exit, then maybe VC, yes. Impact-driven stuff that you want to have organic, slow growth and you want to hold on to forever, maybe VC is not your route. I want to ask another question, or give space to another question that was submitted from Cheryl. So Cheryl asks, do you see Rego creating an app that is more customer and public facing, where an individual can actually pick up the item? Or are you going to stick to just having the platform for more company organization side?
So that's a really great question, because we actually do have a marketplace that people can shop things very affordably from, but we actually give that to a lot of our business partners, meaning what we are really good at is getting something from A to B. And the places that we essentially the B side of the market, the places we bring those things to, they're really the ones that need help reselling or giving away furniture for one reason or another. So in the beginning, we tried to do like an open marketplace, sort of like what you would see on Facebook or something like that, and it becomes really, really chaotic. And so what we instead did was shift our focus to say, well, how can we help the Habitat Restore in Philly better sell their product, or better get these couches into the hands of other people? And that ended up being really successful. And so we get asked a lot about like bringing something back where individual people could pick it up, and we're going to explore it a little bit further, but we want to make sure it stays in line with the mission and what we're really trying to accomplish. And also do it in a way that's benefiting our partners, whether it be the nonprofits, that B side of the market, or even the haulers that we work with, right? A lot of those companies look to, try to give things away to their communities as well. So, we try to think of it from the lens of like, if we make this decision, is it going to help the partners that we work with, rather than, trying to get into territory like what you would see on Facebook Marketplace or a Buy Nothing group or something like that. But it comes up all the time, so you never know how things could evolve.
Yeah, I mean, it's also smart, and a lot of people say that it's good to focus on one thing in the beginning, and then later you can expand. So I appreciate that, if it's working right now with companies, and then later you notice it'll be effective otherwise, that also works. We already only have 10 minutes left. So I think let's take one more question from the chat. And then if you want to ask a question yourself, you can raise your hand, speak directly to Josh. Otherwise, we can ask another question that was sent in already. But Marco, what question do we have in the chat?
Yeah, maybe another question as a continuation of what we just said, as like opening up new revenues. Divya is asking if you also, or you plan to deal with construction and demolition waste, for example, like stones, brick, concrete, or if you see like maybe a market also for that.
That's a good question. I have limited knowledge there, so I don't want to give the wrong insight. In the markets that we work in, to my knowledge from the companies that we've worked with, concrete is I believe one of the most recycled items that come off of a job site, but they're looking at better ways to decarbonize concrete, like from the manufacturing perspective. But there's a lot of companies, like at least in the markets that we operate in, that process that type of construction and demolition waste really well. So really what we're focused on is like, okay, if you have a company that processes that stuff really well, but they struggle to process it because other things are contaminating the dumpster, well, we can actually help them drive better outcomes for their business operations if we're taking the other sort of quote unquote contaminants off of their plate. So for example, it becomes really hard to recycle that debris if there's a couch in it, right? Or if there's clothing, textiles, or what have you in there. So we look at it from the lens of like, we can actually help those companies recycle or even keep more things in circularity that they're already really good at dealing with. And we help them by keeping, contamination out of their dumpsters rather than us trying to get into it ourselves. So that's really another thing I would kind of circle back to the first question as well, of like really understanding where you fit and the value that you can provide to the different players that are already in the space. But yeah, those organizations or that type of recycling also typically requires really heavy machinery, really, really intense licensing and things like that. So I can't see us getting too deep into that space other than, trying to figure out ways that we can better support those companies through, again, lack of, or I don't know if I'm going to say this the right way, but keeping contamination, so to speak, out of their dumpsters, but also bringing in new technologies that may be able to help them from the software side.
Amazing. Thank you. Maybe as one of the last questions, we have one that asks about trends. So or not trends, it looks like. Hold on. Are there any upcoming technological features or services that you plan to launch to enhance? So more future for Rego, where are you looking toward?
Yeah, so we always joke and say one day we'll figure out how to like put a couch into a machine and kick out a bar of gold on the other side. Um, no, it's a really good question, and what we look at in the future is working closer with retailers and manufacturers um, to help essentially, with data collection, right? Like helping them understand what's happening to their stuff in the secondary market so that they can over time make better manufacturing decisions. So understanding like what's happening from just an economic standpoint, like how many times is your couch getting resold, or what's happening to the materials that make up that couch, right? And then I believe once you get that data, then you can come up with a plan that really starts more again from the manufacturing side of the equation that helps you build furniture that is more sustainable over time, but also makes economic sense for them, allows them to operate within guidelines of like, hey, there needs to be, certain fire rating for furniture, right? So if you can gather a lot of that data in the back end to understand what's happening to this stuff, I think then you can help those groups make again those better decisions up front. So that's what we spend a lot of time looking at. There's a lot of trends I think that always come and go throughout really any market, but there are some really cool ones I think popping up in the waste or circular economy space overall.
Thank you. Does anyone want to ask a question raising their hand? Otherwise, I see one more in the chat. I don't know if Kira, you wanted to ask something. I see also Craig asked something.
I guess one of my questions was it was quite nice that it came from such a very real need, the start of the company. And looking back now, do you think you'd have done anything differently at the start?
A million things, a million things. No, that's a really great question, because when I was starting out, I also tried to ask a lot of other like business owners the same question. It's so much easier to say no now because you have to go through those learning experiences, but it was so hard going through the time, and it still is hard, right? Like we're still going through a ton of learning experiences that you have to go through. So hindsight is always 2020 to say, oh, I would have done this instead of that. What caveat I do want to throw in there specific to us is that we actually launched about 2 weeks before COVID. So, I mean, that just threw a wrench into everything, and everybody was just figuring it out as they went. And so I'm hoping that I'll never be in a situation where we are trying to start something like that in some sort of global lockdown. But I would say some advice overall that I've noticed in the startup market, and even with ourselves sometimes when we're trying to launch something new, maybe not necessarily from day one, but maybe we want to test something. There are really simple, fast, easy ways to test whether or not something is viable. But as founders, we oftentimes are blind to how accidentally complicated we want to make it. Like there's a lot you can do to test things with like a jot form, Google Sheets, and like a landing page. Versus like, well, it needs to do this and it needs to do that. So I have to build this custom thing. And like, well, it also has to work in the back end like this. And then all of a sudden, you're 5 weeks in and haven't launched anything. Right. And it's like, well, we could have just tested this with, again, like these 3 off-the-shelf things, a good looking landing page, some Canva marketing, and like within 4 days saw if there was anything there. Right. So I would encourage a lot of that. There's a company I just recently read about that did a really good job of this. If I'm sure it's like, in a Google article somewhere, but there's a company called Copy AI where the founder did a really good job of like building very publicly on Twitter. And so like he went through these incredibly rapid iteration cycles with very simple off-the-shelf products. And then he was able to like go through MVPs within like 2 to 3 weeks at a time. And then I forget exactly how long the MVP process took, but he knew he was then on the right track because on the 3rd or 4th iteration, based on all the Twitter feedback, he launched the new thing, so to speak, and got 40,000 signups in one shot. So then it was like, okay, now I need to go invest in actually building the tech to do this thing, right? And then he had the 40,000, and then I think it was within 4 years grew to like 10 million users. Like that's where I try to encourage people to go, study on day one stuff. Because that's like I think the biggest mistake that I see people make. And again, we still will make that mistake from time to time trying to launch or test something new on our side.
I was snapping over here because I hope everyone heard that. Keep
I
it
gotta find out.
simple. Keep it simple at the beginning. 100%. So easy to do things inexpensively to prove your concept. Josh, do you have time for one more question in the chat here from Craig?
Yeah, let's do it.
So he's asking, let's see, in other words, do you have someone who's been a mentor since the beginning and has really helped you in operations or revenue growth?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I'm a very firm believer in like the old school Dale Carnegie, I'm forgetting the term, but like the Dale Carnegie philosophy of like surround yourself with people who are smarter than you. I'm a very firm believer in that. Like when I played sports, all you were spending your off season doing was like trying to work with new trainers that could help you like get 1% better at something that you're not really doing well. And so, I mean, I didn't know anything about business or starting one for that matter. So I took the exact same approach and just tried to go to any networking event I could find on Eventbrite to just like talk to people and be like, I have this crazy idea, but I don't really know what to do. The first event I ever went to, I met this guy, Harry, who was or still is a startup founder of a mobility startup. And I was like literally just at this random event by myself, didn't know anyone. I got to talking to him, and he still to this day jumps on like late night calls with us, trying to like help us through challenges just out of like the strictest kindness of his heart, because he had other people that like did that for him. So he's literally been with us since like day one, like actually pre-day one. So that's been an awesome experience. And then there have been a lot of others just over the past few years that have like jumped in to help just out of again that startup mentality of like I want to help people like because others help me. And they could see us making mistakes and help us jump ahead of it. So we have now literally like an army of people that we consider like mentors and advisors, and then some of them we've brought on as very formal advisors if they can help with a very specific challenge, or something we believe will be really valuable in the future, because we now want them to also share in the success if we make it right. So we were able to, fortunately grab some of them as more formal advisors now that have, vested interest in the success of the company, which is really exciting because they were helping us before we brought them on as advisors. So, yeah, I know I didn't necessarily whittle that down like one or two people, but in reality, it's been like over, and I think that's what it takes to bring something new into this space where we're even really like, if you think about how hard it is to run a small business, right? Like, no matter how hard it is to run a coffee shop, you need a lot of people to help you out who have been there, done that, and can help you navigate those challenges.
Josh, thank you so much. Thank you so much. It was amazing. We really appreciate what you're doing. I encourage everyone to go check out Rego. We'll share Josh's website and LinkedIn profile if that's okay with him in the Discord. Oh, great. Thank you so much. I hope that this talk has inspired all of you to continue building those circular sustainable projects. I hope Josh is a beacon that it is possible because we need to see more of these projects in reality helping to make a difference. So thank you again, Josh. Thank you all for joining us. We'll send the recording out after this.